Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov chess channel and welcome back to our Slav defense series. So in this series we're covering this very nice opening from white's and from black's perspective, and today we're continuing with the Slav defense with the so-called Winawer Countergambit. The Winawer Countergambit we have analyzed yesterday with a great gameplay by Anatoly Karpov and Evgeny Barev. Evgeny Barev really destroyed Anatoly Karpov with the Winawer Countergambit, but today we're analyzing really a great game from white's perspective where Garry Kasparov faced Predrag Nikolić Winawer Countergambit, and here I think you see really the difference between maybe Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov, because they have really such a different approach to the game, where of course Anatoly Karpov tried to go more positionally into the game. Here really Garry Kasparov accepts this Winawer Countergambit. He's basically begging his opponent to play really sharp opening, because this openings of course fit for a sharp attacker like Garry Kasparov, and Garry Kasparov found really a great counter-attack against Predrag Nikolić Winawer Countergambit. So let's check out now the game. I think you'll see now really the difference. Please also check out now the game between Karpov and Barev. You'll see really the difference between Anatoly Karpov and Garry Kasparov. So let's check out now again this very sharp opening. So d4 here played by Garry Kasparov. We have d5 c4 c6 the Slav defense, and after knight to c3 we have analyzed now this particular move. It's now the so-called Winawer Countergambit. Okay, let's see now how Garry handles this position. So he takes first d takes e5. We have now again the move d4, which was also played in the game between Anatoly Karpov and Evgeny Barev. We have now knight to e4, and now immediately after move queen to a5 now comes already the difference between the approach of Garry Kasparov and also between the approach of Anatoly Karpov. Here Kasparov plays now the move bishop to d2. In the Karpov Barev game, Karpov played the move knight to d2, and you see now here after move bishop to d2 and queen takes e5. Okay, here Nikolić has of course his pawn back, but now the huge difference I think in this position after move knight to g3 is that Garry Kasparov has already two pieces out, and still the queen is centralized. You see black's queen is in the center, so it means now in the continuation of the game I think white can maybe get some extra tempi against the queen and bring even more pieces into the game. So it's I think a much better continuation here for white to play the Winawer Countergambit, because as I said two pieces are out, and in the next move we're threatening also the move knight to f3. The knight in f3 comes also with a direct attack against the queen, so the queen loses another tempo, and we have already three pieces out. When it comes to dynamic positions, of course it's much better to play the game like this. And you see now also what are really the cool ideas now by Garry Kasparov in this particular variation. After move knight to g3 here Predrag Nikolić, as I said, loses immediately a new tempo with the queen. Garry Kasparov brings out the queen, brings out the knight, pardon me, into the game. We have knight to f6 and now queen to c2 here by Kasparov. And here Garry Kasparov is already announcing really a wild game, because after move queen to c2 he's preparing now even to castle queen side. Really wild stuff. So as I said, here it's already that Garry Kasparov has fully development. All he needs to do of course is somehow maybe with the move e3 to break a little bit the main space advantage that black has built. Here we are of course always trying to attack our opponent's other side of the board, so that's why here the move e3 I think in the continuation of the game is very necessary in order to break the main advantage that basically black has here. It's of course the space advantage with the pawn on d4. So here after move queen to c2, bishop to e7, and now queenside castle. Look at this position. I think it's a really dynamic position already, where finally also the rook has come on the d file. Again the queen will get endangered probably, so again Predrag Nikolić will lose another tempo with the queen. So as I said, Garry Kasparov had really some kind of a compensation here in this particular position. So Nikolić castles. We have now e3, breaking the position immediately, and now after d takes e3, now a really wild idea here by Garry Kasparov. He took with the pawn f takes e3, because I think 99% of any player would play simply bishop takes e3, and okay, it seems so that it's a dangerous move. We can of course maybe directly attack the queen. The queen has then to move. Again we got a tempo, but not Garry Kasparov. He realized now that it's really a dynamic position, because after bishop to e3, okay, maybe this continuation could happen. Here queen to c7, knight to f5 would be sort of I think natural idea here for white to occupy the square and force basically black to take out the knight, and then after bishop to f5, queen to f5, here in the continuation black would probably play the move knight knight to a6. And I think although white has sort of a bishop pair in an open position, I don't think that white gains so much, because again, black is now fully developed. Black has castled, black has secured the king, black has brought out all of the minor pieces into the game, and black can also compete here on the d-file. So I don't think that it's such a huge problem here to continue without the bishop here for black. So that's why Garry Kasparov keeps the position dynamic, keeps the position complicated. After move f takes e3, we have now queen to c7, and here bishop to c3. Here Garry Kasparov is already aiming with this bishop against this pawn on g2, because this will be now the main tactical threat. Be prepared, there will be really wild things around the square g7. So you see, it's really different how Garry Kasparov plays the game. I think I myself would play bishop takes e3, immediately attack the queen and hope for the best. So here after move bishop to c3, although Garry Kasparov has now this isolated pawn, but in such dynamic positions, it's not about pawns. We're not counting pawns, we're simply improving our minor pieces, we're simply relying on our piece activity. So after move bishop to c3, we have bishop to g4, bishop to d3. So you see, Garry is placing both of these bishops towards the king side. We have now knight to d7 here by Nikolić, and now bishop to f5, because we have said in the previous analyzed line, if we play knight to f5, black will immediately take out the knight, but we want to have the knight on this very active square. So that's why bishop to f5 here by Garry Kasparov. We have bishop to f5, knight to f5, and here after rook from f to e8, now comes the stunner of the game. Here Garry Kasparov shows basically why he was really one of the best chess players in chess history. Here he plays knight takes g7. So you see, it's almost game over here for Predrag Nikolić, and we're now in move, let me see, 17, and it's already a +2 position here for white. Knight takes g7, a brilliant knight sacrifice. The bishop is aiming here, and I'm pointing again out, if we would have taken with the bishop here on e3, the bishop would be maybe centralized, would aim of course on both of the sides of the board, but as I said, here on c3 the bishop is much more powerful. Here after move knight to g7, Predrag Nikolić is tactically lost, because he has to take now knight takes g7, but now the queen sneaks in. And I wanted to point you out what could actually happen, what is the main tactical threat. Let's play really bad, the worst move here for black. Maybe here the move a5. Now comes the stunner, rook takes d7 is here this tactical threat. This wasn't played in the game, but I wanted to point you out what could actually happen if black plays now really the worst move. After rook takes d7, you can maybe take queen to d7, but now you get of course queen to d7, and you cannot take because of this pin by the bishop against the knight. So really wild stuff. So after move queen to f5, Predrag Nikolić has to play now the move knight to f8. We have now h4 here by Garry Kasparov, although also g4 is here a realistic opportunity with the g4 g5, simply continuing the pressure around the square f6. So here Garry Kasparov proceeded with the move h4. Here Nikolić plays now the move h6. This h6 is a necessary defensive move, because what Nikolić is hoping for now is of course to trade off the queens with queen to c8, and then after queen to c8, then Kasparov could not play this annoying check on g5. So that's the idea behind this move h6. But here after move h6, Kasparov simply continues now the pressure, plays now the move g4 with of course opportunities then afterwards to play the move g5. So here queen to c8, we have queen takes c8, rook takes c8, and now g5. So Garry Kasparov will get his piece back. Here knight to h7, we have now e4, simply improving the position of this isolated pawn. This was of course the main weakness in Garry Kasparov position. Now Garry Kasparov is improving this position. We have rook to d8, rook to f1, continuing the pressure here around the square f6, king to f8, we have now g takes f6, bishop to f6, and now e5. Really good move here by Garry Kasparov, because now at least he is protecting everything. This pawn is now not so weak. This pawn now is of course also now the main space advantage that white has built here. So after move bishop to g7, Garry Kasparov plays rook to g1. Also there are maybe now some tactical threats again with rook takes g7 and then e6, or e6 and then rook takes g7. This could be also sort of an opportunity. Here after move c5, now king to c2, first improving the position of the king. We have rook to e6, we have a rook to g4. Of course there are maybe some threats of here rook to e8, and then maybe continuing the pressure here around the square e5. So Garry Kasparov is playing now flexibly with this rook, wants also maybe in the continuation of the game to place the rook on e4. So here in the continuation we have bishop to h8, now b4, again a brilliant move. If you take, of course, then the bishop will come very, very active into the game. This wouldn't be then a good position here for Nikolić, so that's why he plays now the move b6 after b takes c5, b takes c5. Now Garry Kasparov uses another file on the board. Really, really brilliant stuff here by the world champion. Rook to b1. Now in the continuation we're threatening also, of course, rook to b7, where we can of course occupy the 7th rank. When the rook is dancing on the 7th rank, then again black is facing many tactical problems. So here in the continuation we have rook to a6, and now rook to b2, which was maybe slightly inaccuracy here by Garry Kasparov. Here Garry Kasparov can play immediately rook to b7. If of course rook to a2 happens, then we can play here bishop to b2, and still there are, of course, as I said, this main tactical threats here around the square c7. So here in the continuation after rook to b2, here Nikolić played bishop to g7. Now finally Garry Kasparov plays rook to b7. He realized his mistake in the previous move. Now after rook to a2 we have king to b3 attacking the rook, rook to a6, and now you can pause the video and try to see now the best next move in a couple of moves. Then afterwards Nikolić resigned. Okay, test your might in chess. Try to see now the best continuation here for white. Okay, the best move here for white is of course the move e6, because there are now of course two threats. If you play here bishop takes c3, then of course you get this one, rook to f7, then you have to move the king to e8. Here rook to g8 will happen, you can only cover with the knight, and then rook takes f8 is of course a beautiful checkmate. So after move e6 here Nikolić took with the rook, rook takes e6, but now after rook to g7 again Predrag Nikolić resigned. So brilliant game played by the beast from Baku, by Garry Kasparov. Amazing tactics all over the board. Again, you see how Garry Kasparov plays really these dynamic games. He really loves to play, I think, these sharp games, and I was really very fascinated, especially with this move b4, and of course with this move knight to g7. But this move b4 shows basically the great attacking skills by Garry Kasparov, where he uses simply a new file in order to attack further the position, because black has lost the connection with the rooks, and of course it's time to occupy open files. And of course like Garry Kasparov did in the continuation of the game, for instance, this very important 7th rank. Who is faster always, who is getting on the 7th rank, who is getting on the 2nd rank, from of course from black's perspective, will probably win the game. So again, a beautiful game here played by Garry Kasparov. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this Winawer Countergambit game played by the beast from Baku, Garry Kasparov. If you want to study the Slav defense more, please check out my whole series, the Slav defense from the beginning, with also some different ideas for white and for black. And if you have trouble maybe to play as black, check out my hyper accelerated rank Sicilian defense series and my Nimzo Indian defense series, as good responses to d4 and e4. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best of this.